Soul on Ice by Eldridge Cleaver. Copyright 1968. To Beverly, with whom I share the ultimate of love. Of all the beautiful people who have been so helpful in getting these things into print, I'd like to thank especially Edward M. Keating, creator of Ramparts magazine, who was the first professional to pay any attention to my writings, Maxwell Geismar, whose criticism has helped me gain a degree of control over my materials, and David Welsh for his invaluable assistance as an author. Introduction by Maxwell Geismar. This book, written in prison by a young black American, or Afro-American, is one of the discoveries of the 1960s. In a literary epoch marked by prevailing mediocrity of expression, a lack of substantial new talent, a kind of spiritual slaw after the great wave of American writing from the 1920s to the 1940s, Eldridge Cleaver is one of the distinctive new literary voices to be heard. It reminds me of the great days of the past. It has echoes of Richard Wright's Native Son, just as its true moral affinity is with one of the few other fine books of our period, the autobiography of Malcolm X, and as it represents in American terms the only comparable approach to the writings of Frantz Fanon. In a curious way, Cleaver's book has definite parallels with Fanon's Black Skin, White Mask. In both books, the central problem is of identification as a black soul which has been colonized, more subtly perhaps in the United States for some 300 years, but perhaps even more pervasively by an oppressive white society that projects its brief, narrow vision of life as eternal truth. Eldridge Cleaver very fittingly opens these letters from prison with the section called On Becoming. In 1954, when he was 18 years old, the Supreme Court had just outlawed segregation. He was in Folsom Prison, California, on a marijuana charge. He would be sent back to prison again for what he describes as rape on principle. There is a kind of adolescent innocence, the innocence of genius, in these early letters, just as later there is savage irony and a profound deadpan humor about the white man's civilization in the 20th century United States. Cleaver is simply one of the best cultural critics now writing, and I include in this statement both the formal sociologists and those contemporary fictionists who have mainly abandoned this province of literature for the cultivation of the cult of sensibility. I am aware also of what may be considered excessive praise in this introduction. In that case, I can only beg the reader to stop reading me and start directly with Cleaver. As in Malcolm X's case, here is an outside critic who takes pleasure in dissecting the deepest and most cherished notions of our personal and social behavior, and it takes a certain amount of courage and a willed objectivity to read him. He rakes our favorite prejudices with the savage claws of his prose until our wounds are bare, our psyche is exposed, and we must either fight back or laugh with him for the service he has done us. For the, quote, souls of black folk, in W.E.B. Du Bois' phrase, are the best mirror in which to see the white American self in mid-20th century. It takes a certain boldness on Cleaver's part also to open this collection of essays with the section not merely on rape, but on the whole profound relationship of black men and white women. There is a secret kind of sexual mysticism in this writer which adds depth and tone to his social commentary. This is a highly literary and imaginative mind surveying the salient aspects of our common life. There follow the four vignettes on Watts, on the Muslims, on Catholicism, and Thomas Merton, and on the heroic prison teacher called Eldridge. Here we begin to feel the reach and depth of Eldridge Cleaver's mind on emotional and philosophical issues, as well as historical and social ones. And yes, heroic, a note barely sounded in contemporary fiction, is not inappropriate for certain parts of this deeply revolutionary collection of essays. After a series of religious experiences in prison, the young Cleaver became a Muslim convert, then a Muslim preacher of extraordinary eloquence and conviction, and then a firm follower of Malcolm X. Through this process, he regained his previously alienated and splintered self-image as a child of the California black ghetto, and from this point began the remarkable process of self-analysis, self-education, and self-expression described in the pages of this book. The essay called Initial Reactions on the Assassination of Malcolm X, written in 1965, is a document of prime importance for an understanding of the outcast black American soul today. It illuminates all the long hot summers of rioting, violence, and senseless destruction. Here, Cleaver unites the militant black resistance movement in the United States with the currents of world revolution in a way which may come as a shock to many white Americans of liberal persuasion and spiritual goodwill. Yet it is so, and the sooner we try to understand it, the better, and Eldridge Cleaver can help us in this process. We shall have our manhood. We shall have it, or the earth will be leveled by our attempts to gain it. And some parts of the American earth have already been leveled by this prophetic spirit of wrath and human dignity. But it is the part of the book called Blood of the Beast, and such pieces as The White Race and Its Heroes, that I find of primary importance and of the greatest literary value. Describing himself as an au fait watcher, Cleaver describes this historical period and this American culture in terms of the most astringent accuracy, the most ruthless irony, and the most insistent truthfulness. He reminds us of all the simple verities that decades of Cold War distortion and hypocrisy have almost wiped from our historical record, our historical consciousness. The book is a handsome account of those years in the early 60s when the civil rights campaign stirred up a national psyche that had been unnaturally comatose, slothful, and evasive since the McCarthyite trauma. There is an atmosphere of turbulence in these essays, moving from the advent of the Beats and Jack Kerouac's On the Road to Leroy Jones' revolutionary verses, and then back to the abolitionist, so scorned and despised by the Southern revisionist historians of the modern epoch, to Harriet Beecher Stowe, and to that famous 4th of July peroration for the slave race by Frederick Douglass in 1852. In the concluding part of this book, it seems that Eldridge Cleaver has reached his own spiritual convalescence, his healed spirit, no longer racist or narrowly nationalist, and his mature power as a writer. And how those pages do sparkle. The essay Lazarus Come Forth on Negro celebrities and on boxing as the virility symbol of the American masses, and on Muhammad Ali in particular, is a beauty. Here, Cleaver begins to touch on all aspects of American culture with a sure touch and clear vision. Notes on the native son is the best analysis of James Baldwin's literary career I have read. And while Cleaver calmly says things that no white critic could really dare to say, there is not a trace of petty artistic jealousy or self-vanity in his discussion, such as that, for example, which marked Baldwin's own repudiation of his former mentor, Richard Wright. The essay called Rallying Round the Flag gives us the plain, hard, truthful Afro-American view of the Vietnam War, which Martin Luther King, just lately, has corroborated. It is in fact the worldview of our aberrant national behavior in Southeast Asia. But just as this volume opens on the theme of love, just as Eldridge Cleaver never misses the sexual core of every social or racial phenomenon, so it closes on it. There are touching and illuminating letters to the California civil rights lawyer Beverly Axelrod, who, awed by Cleaver's talent, as all of us were, who first encountered it several years ago, succeeded in obtaining his release from Folsom Prison after 9 years. There is the section of the book called The Primeval Mitosis, close to a kind of Laurentian sexual mysticism again, which bodies forth such engaging social types as the supermasculine menial and the ultra-feminine doll. The sexual social myth Cleaver has invented for the second-class black male. All body, no brain. And the pure white southern lady, say languishing and swooning her days away. These are the exotic myths and fabricated legends of a racial caste system embodied in a hypocritical class society. These are the satiric fantasies hovering around something which might be called the essential miscegenation as the missing key, the unthinkable solution to the American race problem. I had forgotten to mention the wonderfully ironic descriptions of the twist as the social symptom of the new age of dawning racial equality. Here, as with the Beatles and rock and roll, when Eldridge Cleaver moves into the area of mass entertainment in the United States, he is as close as he ever comes to an open laughter at the white man's antics, just as in the concluding apostrophe from the black eunuch to the black queen. To the fertile black womb of all history, he reminds us how civilization has always mocked human gaiety. M.G. Harrison, New York, June 1967. 1. Letters from Prison. On Becoming, Folsom Prison, June 25th, 1965. On Becoming. 1954, when I was 18 years old, is held to be a crucial turning point in the history of the African American. For the USA as a whole, the year segregation was outlawed by the U.S. Supreme Court. It was also a crucial year for me because on June 18, 1954, I began serving a sentence in state prison for possession of marijuana. The Supreme Court decision was only 1 month old when I entered prison, and I do not believe that I had even the vaguest idea of its importance or historical significance. But later, the acrimonious controversy ignited by the end of the separate but equal doctrine was to have a profound effect on me. This controversy awakened me to my position in America, and I began to form a concept of what it meant to be black in white America. Of course, I'd always known that I was black, but I never really stopped to take stock of what I was involved in. I meant life as an individual and took my chances. Prior to 1954, We lived in an atmosphere of Novocaine. Negroes found it necessary, in order to maintain whatever sanity they could, to remain somewhat aloof and detached from the problem. We accepted indignities and the mechanics of the apparatus of oppression without reacting by sitting in or holding mass demonstrations. Nurtured by the fires of the controversy over segregation, I was soon aflame with indignation over my newly discovered social status, and inwardly I turned away from America with horror, disgust, and outrage. In Soledad State Prison, I fell in with a group of young blacks who, like myself, were in vociferous rebellion against what we perceived as a continuation of slavery on a higher plane. We cursed everything American, including baseball and hot dogs. All respect we may have had for politicians, preachers, lawyers, governors, presidents, senators, congressmen was utterly destroyed as we watched them temporizing and compromising over right and wrong, over legality and illegality, over constitutionality and unconstitutionality. We knew that in the end, what they were clashing over was us, what to do with the blacks, and whether or not to start treating us as human beings. I despised all of them. The segregationalists were condemned out of hand, without even listening to their lofty, finely woven arguments. The others I despised for wasting time in debates with the segregationalists. Why not just crush them, put them in prison? They were defying the law, weren't they? I defied the law and they put me in prison, so why not put those dirty mothers in prison too? I had gotten caught with a shopping bag full of marijuana, a shopping bag full of love. I was in love with the weed, and I did not for 1 minute think that anything was wrong with getting high. I had been getting high for 4 or 5 years and was convinced, with the zeal of a crusader, that marijuana was superior to lush. Yet the rulers of the land seemed all to be luscious. I could not see how they were more justified in drinking than I was in blowing the gauge. I was a grasshopper, and it was natural that I felt myself to be unjustly imprisoned. While all this was going on, our group was espousing atheism. Unsophisticated and not based on any philosophical rationale, our atheism was pragmatic. I had come to believe that there is no God. If there is, men do not know anything about him. Therefore, all religions were phony, which made all preachers and priests, in our eyes, fakers, including the ones scurrying around the prison who, curiously, could put in a good word for you with the almighty creator of the universe, but could not get anything down with the warden or parole board. They could usher you through the pearly gates after you were dead, but not through the prison gate while you were still alive and kicking. Besides, men of the cloth who work in prison have an ineradicable stigma attached to them in the eyes of convicts because they escort condemned men into the gas chamber. Such men of God are powerful arguments in favor of atheism. Our atheism was a source of enormous pride to me. Later on, I bolstered our arguments by reading Thomas Paine and his devastating critique of Christianity in particular and organized religion in general. Through reading, I was amazed to discover how confused people were. I had thought that out there beyond the horizon of my own ignorance, unanimity existed, that even though I myself didn't know what was happening in the universe, other people certainly did. Yet here I was discovering that the whole USA was in a chaos of disagreement over segregation, integration. In these circumstances, I decided that the only safe thing for me to do was go for myself. It became clear that it was possible for me to take the initiative. Instead of simply reacting, I could act. I could unilaterally, whether anyone agreed with me or not, repudiate all allegiances, morals, values, even while continuing to exist within this society. My mind would be free, and no power in the universe could force me to accept something if I didn't want to. But I would take my own sweet time. That too was a part of my new freedom. I would accept nothing until it was proved that it was good for me. I became an extreme iconoclast. Any affirmative assertion made by anyone around me became a target for tirades of criticism and denunciation. This little game got good to me, and I got good at it. I attacked all forms of piety, loyalty, and sentiment, marriage, love, God, patriotism, the Constitution, the Founding Fathers, law, concepts of right, wrong, good, evil, all forms of ritualized and conventional behavior. As I pranced about, club in hand, seeking new idols to smash, I encountered, really, for the first time in my life, with any seriousness, the ogre, rising up before me in a mist. I discovered with alarm that the ogre possessed a tremendous and dreadful power over me, and I didn't understand this power or why I was at its mercy. I tried to repudiate the ogre, root it out of my heart, as I had done God, Constitution, principles, morals, and values. But the ogre had its claws buried in the core of my being and refused to let go. I fought frantically to be free, but the ogre only mocked me and sank its claws deeper into my soul. I knew then that I had found an important key, that if I had conquered the ogre and broke its power over me, I would be free. But I also knew that it was a race against time, and that if I did not win, I would certainly be broken and destroyed. I, a black man, confronted the ogre, the white woman. In prison, those things withheld from and denied to all prisoners became precisely what he wants most of all. Of course, because we were locked up in our cells before darkness fell, I used to lie awake at night, racked by painful craving to take a leisurely stroll under the stars, or to go to the beach, to drive a car on a freeway, to grow a beard, or to make love to a woman. Since I was not married, conjugal visits would not have solved my problem. I therefore denounced the idea of conjugal visits as inherently unfair. Single prisoners needed and deserved action just as married prisoners did. I advocated establishing a system under civil service whereby salaried women would minister to the needs of those prisoners who maintained a record of good behavior. If a married prisoner preferred his own wife, that would be his right. Since California was not about to inaugurate either conjugal visits or the civil service, one could advocate either with equal enthusiasm and with the same result: nothing. This may appear ridiculous to some people, but it was very real to me, and as urgent as the need to breathe. Because I was in my bold stage, and lack of access to females was absolutely a form of torture. I suffered. My mistress at the time of my arrest, the beautiful and lonely wife of a serviceman stationed overseas, died unexpectedly 3 weeks after I entered prison, and the rigid, dehumanized rules governing correspondence between prisoners and free people prevented me from corresponding with other young ladies I knew. It left me without any contact with females except those in my family. In the process of enduring my confinement, I decided to get myself a pinup girl to paste on the wall of my cell. I would fall in love with her and lavish my affections upon her. She, a symbolic representative of the forbidden tribe of women, would sustain me until I was free, out of the center of Esquire. I married a voluptuous bride. Our marriage went along swell for a time. No quarrels, no complaints. And then, one evening when I came in from school, I was shocked and enraged to find that the guard had entered my cell, ripped my sugar from the wall, torn her into little pieces, and left the pieces floating in the commode. It was like seeing a dead body floating in a lake. Giving her a proper burial, I flushed the commode. As the saying goes, I sent her to Long Beach. But I was genuinely beside myself with anger. Almost every cell, excepting those of the homosexuals, had a pinup girl on the wall, and the guards didn't bother them. Why? I asked the guard the next day. Had he singled me out for special treatment? "Don't you know we have a rule against pasting up pictures on the wall?" he asked me. "Later for the rules," I said. "You know as well as I do that that rule is not enforced." "Tell you what," he said, smiling at me. The smile put me on my guard. "I'll compromise with you. Get yourself a colored girl for a pinup. No white women, and I'll let it stay up. Is that a deal?" I was more embarrassed than shocked. He was laughing in my face. I called him 2 or 3 dirty names and walked away. I can still recall his big moon face, grinning at me over yellow teeth. The disturbing part about the whole incident was that a terrible feeling of guilt came over me as I realized that I had chosen the picture of the white girl over the available pictures of black girls. I tried to rationalize it away, but I was fascinated by the truth involved. Why hadn't I thought about it in this light before? So I took hold of the question and began to inquire into my feelings. Was it true? Did I really prefer white girls over black? The conclusion was clear and inescapable. I did. I decided to check out my friends on this point, and it was easy to determine from listening to their general conversation that the white woman occupied a peculiarly prominent place in all of our frames of reference. With what I have learned since then, this all seems terribly elementary now. But at the time, it was a tremendously intriguing adventure of discovery. One afternoon, when a large group of Negroes was on the prison yard shooting the breeze, I grabbed the floor and posed the question: which did they prefer, white women or black? Some said Japanese women were their favorite, others said Chinese, some said European women, others said Mexican women. They all stated a preference, and they generally freely admitted their dislike for black women. "I don't want nothing but a Cadillac," said one. "If money was black, I wouldn't want none of it," put in another. A short little stud, who was a very good lightweight boxer with a little man's complex that made him love to box heavyweights, jumped to his feet. He had a yellowish complexion, and we called him Butterfly. "All you niggas are sick," Butterfly spat out. "I don't like no stinking white women. My grandma's a white woman and I don't even like her." But it just so happened that Butterfly's crime partner was in the crowd, and after Butterfly had his say, his crime partner said, "Oh, sit on down and quit that lying, little old chump. What about that gray girl in San Jose who had your nose wide open? Do you like her? Or were you just running after her with your tongue hanging out of your head because you hated her?" Partly because he was embarrassed and partly because his crime partner was a heavyweight, Butterfly flew into him. And before we could separate them and disperse, so the guard would not know who had been fighting, Butterfly bloodied his crime partner's nose. Butterfly got away, but because of the blood, his crime partner got caught. I ate dinner with Butterfly that evening and questioned him sharply about his attitude toward white women. And after an initial evasiveness, he admitted that white women bugged him too. "It's a sickness," he said. "All our lives, we've had the white women dangle before our eyes like a carrot on a stick before a donkey. Look, but don't touch." In 1958, after I had gone out on parole and was returned to San Quentin as a parole violator with the new charge, Butterfly was still there. He had become a black Muslim and was chiefly responsible for teaching me the black Muslim philosophy. Upon his release from San Quentin, Butterfly joined the ranks of the Los Angeles Mosque, advanced rapidly, and is now a full-fledged minister of one of Elijah Muhammad's mosques in another city. He successfully completed his parole, got married to a very black girl, and is doing fine. From our discussion, which began that evening and has never yet ended, we went on to notice how thoroughly, as a matter of course, a black growing up in America is indoctrinated with the white racist standard of beauty. Not that the whites made a conscious, calculated effort to do this, we thought, but since they constituted the majority, the whites brainwashed the blacks by the very processes the whites employed to indoctrinate themselves with their own group standards. It intensified my frustrations to know that I was indoctrinated to see the white woman as more beautiful and desirable than my own black woman. It drove me into books seeking light on the subject. In Richard Wright's Native Son, I found Bigger Thomas and a keen insight into the problem. My interest in this area persisted undiminished, and then, in 1955, an event took place in Mississippi which turned me inside out. Emmett Till, a young Negro down from Chicago on a visit, was murdered, allegedly for flirting with the white woman. He had been shot, his head crushed from repeated blows with a blunt instrument, and his badly decomposed body was recovered from the river with a heavy weight on it. I was of course angry over the whole bit, but one day I saw in a magazine a picture of the white woman with whom Emmett Till was said to have flirted. While looking at the picture, I felt that little tension in the center of my chest I experience when a woman appeals to me. I was disgusted and angry with myself. Here was a woman who had caused the death of a black, possibly because when he looked at her, he also felt the same tensions of lust and desire in his chest, and probably for the same general reasons that I felt them. It was all unacceptable to me. I looked at the picture again and again, and in spite of everything, and against my will, and the hate I felt for the woman and all that she represented, she appealed to me. I flew into a rage at myself, at America, at white women, at the history that had placed those tensions of lust and desire in my chest. 2 days later, I had a nervous breakdown. For several days I ranted and raved against the white race, against white women in particular, against white America in general. When I came to myself, I was locked in a padded cell with not even the vaguest memory of how I got there. All I could recall was an eternity of pacing back and forth in the cell, preaching to the unhearing walls. I had several sessions with the psychiatrist. His conclusion was that I hated my mother. How he arrived at this conclusion I'll never know, because he knew nothing about my mother, and when he asked me questions I would answer him with absurd lies. What revolted me about him was that he had heard me denouncing the whites, yet each time he interviewed me he deliberately guided the conversation back to my family life, to my childhood. That in itself was all right, but he deliberately blocked all my attempts to bring out the racial question, and he made it clear that he was not interested in my attitude toward whites. This was a Pandora's box he did not care to open. After I ceased my diatribes against the whites, I was led out of the hospital, back into the general inmate population, just as if nothing had happened. I continued to brood over these events and over the dynamics of race relations in America. During this period, I was concentrating my reading in the field of economics. Having previously dabbled in the theories and writings of Rousseau, Thomas Paine, and Voltaire, I had added a little polish to my iconoclastic stance, without, however, bothering too much to understand their affirmative positions. In economics, because everybody seemed to find it necessary to attack and condemn Karl Marx in their writings, I sought out his books. And although he kept me with a headache, I took him for my authority. I was not prepared to understand him, but I was able to see in him a thoroughgoing critique and condemnation of capitalism. It was like taking medicine for me to find that, indeed, American capitalism deserved all the hatred and contempt that I felt for it in my heart. This had a positive, stabilizing effect upon me, to an extent because I was not about to become stable, and it diverted me from my previous preoccupation, morbid broodings on the black man and the white woman. Pursuing my readings into the history of socialism, I read with very little understanding some of the passionate, exhortatory writings of Lenin, and I fell in love with Bakunin and Nechaev's Catechism of the Revolutionist, the principles of which, along with some of Machiavelli's advice, I sought to incorporate into my own behavior. I took the Catechism for my Bible, and standing on a one-man platform that had nothing to do with the reconstruction of society, I began consciously incorporating these principles into my daily life, to employ tactics of ruthlessness in my dealings with everyone with whom I came into contact, and I began to look at white America through these new eyes. Somehow I arrived at the conclusion that as a matter of principle, it was of paramount importance for me to have an antagonistic, ruthless attitude toward white women. The term outlaw appealed to me, and at the time my parole date was drawing near, I considered myself to be mentally free. I was an outlaw. I had stepped outside of the white man's law, which I repudiated with scorn and self-satisfaction. I became a law unto myself, my own legislature, my own Supreme Court, my own executive. At the moment I walked out of the prison gate, my feelings toward white women in general could be summed up in the following lines. To a white girl, I love you because you're white, not because you're charming or bright. Your whiteness is a silky thread, snaking through my thoughts in red-hot patterns of lust and desire. I hate you because you're white. Your white meat is nightmare food. White is the skin of evil. You're my Moby Dick, white witch, symbol of the rope and hanging tree, of the burning cross. Loving you thus, and hating you so, my heart is torn in two, crucified. I became a rapist. To refine my technique and modus operandi, I started out by practicing on black girls in the ghetto. In the black ghetto where dark and vicious deeds appear not as aberrations or deviations from the norm, but as part of the sufficiency of the evil of a day. And when I considered myself smooth enough, I crossed the tracks and sought out white prey. I did this consciously, deliberately, willfully, methodically, though looking back, I see that I was in a frantic, wild, and completely abandoned frame of mind. Rape was an insurrectionary act. It delighted me that I was defying and trampling upon the white man's law, upon his system of values, and that I was defiling his women. At this point, I believe, was the most satisfying to me, because I was very resentful over the historical fact of how the white man has used the black women. I felt I was getting revenge. From the sight of the act of rape, consternation spreads outwardly in concentric circles. I wanted to send waves of consternation throughout the white race. Recently, I came upon a quotation from one of Leroy Jones' poems, taken from his book, The Dead Lecturer. A cult of death, need of the simple striking arm under the street lamp, the cutters from under their rented earth. Come up, black Dada nihilismus, rape the white girls, rape their fathers, cut the mothers' throats. I have lived those lines, and I know that if I had not been apprehended, I would have slit some white throats. There are, of course, many young blacks out there right now who are slitting white throats and raping the white girl. They are not doing this because they read Leroy Jones' poetry, as some of his critics seem to believe. Rather, Leroy is expressing the funky facts of life. After I returned to prison, I took a long look at myself and, for the first time in my life, admitted that I was wrong, that I had gone astray. Astray not so much from the white man's law as from being human, civilized, for I could not approve the act of rape. Even though I had some insight into my own motivations, I did not feel justified. I lost my self-respect. My pride as a man dissolved, and my whole fragile moral structure seemed to collapse, completely shattered. That is why I started to write, to save myself. I realized that no one could save me but myself. The prison authorities were both uninterested and unable to help me. I had to seek out the truth and unravel the snarled web of my motivations. I had to find out who I am and what I want to be, what type of man I should be, and what I could do to become the best of which I was capable. I understood that what had happened to me had also happened to countless other blacks, and it would happen to many, many more. I learned that I had been taking the easy way out, running away from problems. I also learned that it is easier to do evil than it is to do good. And I have been terribly impressed by the youth of America, black and white. I am proud of them because they have reaffirmed my faith in humanity. I have come to feel what must be love for the young people of America, and I want to be part of the good and greatness that they want for all people. From my prison cell, I have watched America slowly coming awake. It is not fully awake yet, but there is a soul in the air, and everywhere I see beauty. I have watched the sit-ins, the freedom rage, the Mississippi Blood Summers, demonstrations all over the country, the FSM movement, the teach-ins, and the mounting protest over Lyndon Strangelove's foreign policy. All of this, the thousands of little details, show me it is time to straighten up and fly right. That is why I decided to concentrate on my writings and efforts in this area. We are a very sick country. I, perhaps, am sicker than most, but I accept that. I told you in the beginning that I am extremist by nature, so it is only right that I should be extremely sick. I was very familiar with the Eldridge who came to prison, but that Eldridge no longer exists, and the one I am now is in some ways a stranger to me. You may find this difficult to understand, but it is very easy for one in prison to lose his sense of self. And if he has been undergoing all kinds of extreme, involved, and unregulated changes, then he ends up not knowing who he is. Take the point of being attractive to women. You can easily see how a man can lose his arrogance or certainty on that point while in prison. When he's in the free world, he gets constant feedback on how he looks from the number of female heads he turns when he walks down the street. In prison, he gets only hateful stares and sour frowns. Years and years of bitter looks. Individuality is not nourished in prison, neither by the officials nor by the convicts. It is a deep hole out of which to climb. What must be done, I believe, is that all these problems, particularly the sickness between the white woman and the black man, must be brought out into the open, dealt with and resolved. I know that the black man's sick attitude toward the white woman is a revolutionary sickness. It keeps him perpetually out of harmony with the system that is oppressing him. Many whites flatter themselves with the idea that the Negro male's lust and desire for the white dream girl is purely an aesthetic attraction. But nothing could be farther from the truth. His motivation is often of such a bloody, hateful, bitter, and malignant nature that whites would really be hard-pressed to find it flattering. I have discussed these points with prisoners who were convicted of rape, and their motivations are very plain. But they are very reluctant to discuss these things with white men who, by and large, make up the prison staffs. I believe that in the experience of these men lies the knowledge and wisdom that must be utilized to help other youngsters who are heading in the same direction. I think all of us, the entire nation, will be better off if we bring it all out front. A lot of people's feelings will be hurt, but that is the price that must be paid. It may be that I can harm myself by speaking frankly and directly, but I do not care about that at all. Of course, I want to get out of prison badly, but I shall get out someday. I'm more concerned with what I'm going to be after I get out. I know that by following the course which I have charted, I will find my salvation. If I had followed the path laid down for me by the officials, I'd undoubtedly have long since been out of prison. But I'd be less of a man. I'd be weaker and less certain of where I want to go, what I want to do, and how to go about it. The price of hating other human beings is loving oneself less. Soul on Ice. Folsom Prison, October 9th, 1965. I'm perfectly aware that I'm in prison, that I'm a Negro, that I've been a rapist, and that I have a higher uneducation. I never know what significance I'm supposed to attach to these factors, but I have a suspicion that because of these aspects of my character, quote, free, normal, educated people rather expect me to be more reserved, penitent, remorseful, and not too quick to shoot off my mouth on certain subjects. But I let them down, disappoint them, make them gape at me in a sort of stupor, as if they're thinking, "You got your nerve. Don't you realize that you owe a debt to society?" My answer to all such thoughts lurking in their split-level heads, crouching behind their squinting bombardier eyes, is that the blood of Vietnamese peasants has paid off all my debts, that the Vietnamese people afflicted with a rampant disease called Yankees, through their sufferings as opposed to the frustration of fat-assed American geeks safe at home, worrying over whether to have bacon, ham, or sausage with their grade A eggs in the morning, while Vietnamese worry each morning whether the Yankees will gas them, burn them up, or blow away their humble pads in a hail of bombs, have canceled all my IOUs. In beginning this letter, I could just as easily have mentioned other aspects of my situation. I could have said I'm perfectly aware that I'm tall, that I'm skinny, that I need a shave, that I'm hard up enough to suck my grandmother's old withered tits, and that I would dig deeper than deeply, getting clean once more, not only in the steam bath sense, but in getting sharp as an Esquire square with a Harlem touch, or that I would like to put on a pair of bib overalls and become a snicker, or that I'd like to leap the whole last mile and grow a beard and don whatever threads the local nationalism might require, and comrade with Che Guevara and share his fate, blazing a new Pathfinder's trail through the stymied upbeat brain of the new left, or how I just love to be in Berkeley right now, to roll in that mud, frolic in the sty of funky revolution, to breathe in its heady fumes and look with roving eyes for a new John Brown, Eugene Debs, a blacker, meaner, keener Malcolm X, a Robert Franklin Williams with less rabbit in his hot blood, an American Lenin, Fidel, a Mau Mau, 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 all of which is true. But what matters is that I have fallen in love with my lawyer. Is that surprising? A convict is expected to have a high regard for anyone who comes to his aid, who tries to help him, and who expends time, energy, and money in an effort to set him free. But can a convict really love a lawyer? It goes against the grain. Convicts hate lawyers. To walk around a prison yard and speak well of a lawyer is to raise the downcast eyebrows of felons who've been bitten by members of the bar and grill. Convicts are convinced that lawyers must have a secret little black book which no one else is ever allowed to see, a book that schools lawyers in an esoteric morality in which the highest good is treachery and crossing one's dumb and trusting client, the noblest of deeds. It was learned by the convicts that I'd gotten busted with some magazines given to me by my lawyer, and that I was thrown in the hole for it. Convicts smiled knowingly and told me that I had gone for the greasy pig, that my lawyer had set me up, and that if I couldn't see through the plot, I was so stupid that I would buy not only the Golden Gate Bridge, but some fried ice cream. It was my turn to smile knowingly. A convict's paranoia is as thick as the prison wall, and just as necessary. Why should we have faith in anyone, even our wives and lovers whose beds we have shared, with whom we have shared the tenderest moments and most delicate relations, leave us after a while, put us down, cut us clean and loose, and treat us like they hate us, won't even write us a letter, send us a Christmas card every other year, or a quarter for a pack of cigarettes, or a tube of toothpaste now and then. All society shows the convict its ass and expects him to kiss it. The convict feels like kicking it or pulling it, bullying it. A convict sees man's fangs and claws and learns quickly to bear and unsheath his own, for real and final. To maintain a hold on the ideals and sentiments of civilization in such circumstances is probably impossible. How much more incredible is it than, while rooted in this pit, to fall in love, and with a lawyer? Use a lawyer. Yes, use anybody. Even tell the lawyer that you're in love, but you will always know when you are lying, and even if you could manage to fool the lawyer, you could never manage to fool yourself. And why does it make you sad to see how everything hangs by such thin and whimsical threads? Because you're a dreamer, an incredible dreamer, with a tiny spark hidden somewhere inside you which cannot die, which even you cannot kill or quench, and which tortures you horribly because all the odds are against its continual burning. In the midst of the foulest decay and putrid savagery, this spark speaks to you of beauty, of human warmth and kindness, of goodness, of greatness, of heroism, of martyrdom, and it speaks to you of love. So I love my lawyer. My lawyer is not an ordinary person. My lawyer is a rebel, a revolutionary who is alienated fundamentally from the status quo, probably with as great an intensity, conviction, and irretrievability as I am alienated from it, and probably with more intelligence, compassion, and humanity. If you read the papers, you are no doubt aware of my lawyer's incessant involvement in agitation against all manifestations of the monstrous evil of our system, such as our intervention in the internal affairs of the Vietnamese people, or the invasion of the Dominican Republic by U.S. Marines. And my lawyer defends civil rights demonstrators, sit-inners, and the free speech students who rebelled against the Curve Strong machine at the University of California. My love for my lawyer is due in part to these activities and involvements, because we are always on the same side of the issues, and I love all my allies. But this, which may be the beginning of an explanation, does not nearly explain what goes on between my lawyer and me. I suppose that I should be honest, and before going any further, admit that my lawyer is a woman, or maybe I should have held back with that piece of the puzzle. A very excellent, unusual, and beautiful woman. I know that she believes that I do not really love her, and that I am confusing a combination of lust and gratitude for love. Lust and gratitude I feel abundantly, but I also love this woman, and I fear that, believing that I do not love her, she will act according to that belief. At night, I talk with her in my sleep. Long dialogues in which she answers back. We alternate in speaking, like in the script of a play. And let me say that I don't believe a word she says. While we are talking, I participate and believe everything, taking her word as her bond. But when I awake, I repudiate the conversation and disbelieve her. I awake refreshed, and though my sleep has been restless, I am not tired, except for a few lost hours in which she slips away and I fall into a deep sleep. I hover on a level between consciousness and peace, and the dialogue ensues. It does not bother me now. I have often gone through this when something seizes my mind. I place a great deal of emphasis on people really listening to each other, to what the other person has to say, because you very seldom encounter a person who is capable of taking either you or himself seriously. Of course, when I was out of prison, I was not really like this. The seeds were there, but there was too much confusion and madness mixed in. I had a profound desire for communicating with and getting to know other people, but I was incapable of doing so. I didn't know how. Getting to know someone, entering that new world, is an ultimate, irretrievable leap into the unknown. The prospect is terrifying. The stakes are high. The emotions are overwhelming. The two people are reluctant, really, to strip themselves naked in front of each other, because in doing so they make themselves vulnerable and give enormous power over themselves one to the other. How often they inflict pain and torment upon each other. Better to maintain shallow, superficial affairs. That way the scars are not too deep. No blood is hacked from the soul. But I do not believe a beautiful relationship has to end always in carnage, or that we have to be fraudulent and pretentious with each other. If we project fraudulent, pretentious images, or if we fantasize each other into distorted caricatures of what we really are, then, when we awake from the trance and see beyond the sham and front, all will dissolve, all will die or be transformed into bitterness and hate. I know that sometimes people fake on each other out of genuine motives to hold on to the object of their tenderest feelings. They see themselves as so inadequate that they feel forced to wear a mask in order continuously to impress the second party. If a man is free, not in prison, the army, a monastery, hospital, spaceship, submarine, and living a normal life with the usual multiplicity of social relations with individuals of both sexes, it may be that he is incapable of experiencing the total impact of another individual upon himself. The competing influences and conflicting forces of other personalities may dilute one's psychic and emotional perception to the extent that one does not and cannot receive all that the other person is capable of sending. Yet I may believe that a man whose soul or emotional apparatus had lain dormant in a deadening limbo of desuetude is capable of responding from some great sunken well of its being, as though a potent catalyst had been tossed into a critical mass, when an exciting, lovely, and lovable woman enters the range of his feelings. What a deep, slow, torturous, reluctant, frightened stirring. He feels a certain part of himself in a state of flux, as if a bodiless stranger has stolen inside his body, startling him by doing calisthenics, and he feels himself coming slowly back to life. His body chemistry changes and he is flushed with new strength. When she first comes to him, his heart is empty, a desolate place, a dehydrated oasis, unsolaced, and he's craving woman food, without which sustenance the tension of his manhood has unwound and relaxed. He has imperative need of the kindness, sympathy, understanding, and conversation of a woman, to hear a woman's laughter at his words, to answer her question and be answered by her, to look into her eyes, to sniff her primeval fragrance, to hear with slaughtered ears the sensuous rustling of frivolous garments as legs are crossed and uncrossed beneath the table, to feel the delicate, shy weight of her hand in his. How painfully and totally aware is he of her presence, her every movement. It is as if one had been left to die beneath a bush on a lonely trail. The sun is hot, and the shade of the bush, if not offering an extension of life, offers at least a slowing down of death. And just when one feels the next breath will surely be his last, a rare and rainbow-colored bird settles on a delicate twig of the bush, and with the magic of melodious trillings and beauty of plumage, charms the dying one back to life. The dying man feels the strength flowing into and through the conduits of his body from the charged atmosphere created by the presence of the bird, and he knows intuitively, in his clinging to life, that if the bird remains, he will regain his strength and health, and live. Seeing her image slipping away from the weak fingers of his mind as soon as she has gone, his mind fights for a token of her on which to peg memory. Jealousy, he hoards the fading memory of their encounter, like a miser gloating over a folio of blue-chip stock. The unfathomable machinery of the subconscious projects an image onto the conscious mind. Her bare right arm, from curve of shoulder to fingertip, had his lips quivered with desire to brand that soft, cool-looking flesh with a kiss of fire, had his fingers itched to caress. Such is the magic of a woman, the female principle of nature which she embodies in her power to resurrect and revitalize a long isolated and lonely man. I was 22 when I came to prison, and of course I have changed tremendously over the years. But I had always had a strong sense of myself, and in the last few years I felt I was losing my identity. There was a deadness in my body that eluded me, as though I could not exactly locate its site. I would be aware of this numbness, this feeling of atrophy, and it haunted the back of my mind. Because of this numb spot, I felt peculiarly off balance. The awareness of something missing, of a blank spot, a certain intimation of emptiness. Now I know what it was. After 8 years in prison, I was visited by a woman who was interested in my work and cared about what happened to me. And since encountering her, I feel life, strength flowing back into that spot. My step, the tread of my stride, which was becoming tentative and uncertain, has begun to recover a definiteness, a confidence, a boldness which makes me want to kick over a few tables. I may even swagger a little, and, as I read in a book somewhere, push myself forward like a train. 4 vignettes on Watts. Folsom Prison, August 16th, 1965. As we left the mess hall Sunday morning and milled around in the prison yard, after 4 days of abortive uprising in Watts, a group of lowriders. Note: lowrider, a Los Angeles nickname for ghetto youth. Originally, the term was coined to describe the youth who had lowered the bodies of their cars so that they rolled low, close to the ground. Also implied was the style of driving that these youngsters perfected. Sitting behind the steering wheel and slumped low down in the seat, all that could be seen of them was from their eyes up, which used to be the cool way of driving. When these youthful hipsters alighted from their vehicles, the term lowrider stuck with them, evolving to the point where all black ghetto youth, but never the soft offspring of the black bourgeoisie, are referred to as lowriders. From Watts assembled on the basketball court. They were wearing jubilant, triumphant smiles, animated by a vicarious spirit by which they too were in the thick of the uprising taking place hundreds of miles away to the south in the Watts ghetto. "Man," said one, "what they doing out there? Break it down for me, baby." They slapped each other's outstretched palms in a cool salute and burst out laughing with joy. "Homeboy, them brothers is taking care of business," shrieked another ecstatically. Then one lowrider, stepping into the center of the circle formed by the others, reared back on his legs and swaggered, hunching his belt up with his forearms as he'd seen James Cagney and George Raft do in too many gangster movies. I joined the circle, sensing a creative moment in the offing. We all got very quiet, very still, and others passing by joined the circle and did likewise. "Baby," he said, "they walking in fours and kicking in doors, dropping reds." Note: reds are barbiturate called red devils, so called because of the color of the capsule and because they are reputed to possess a vicious kick. End note. And busting heads, drinking wine and committing crime, shooting and looting, high-siding and low-riding, setting fires, slashing tires, turning over cars and burning down bars, making Parker mad and making me glad, putting an end to that go slow crap and putting Sweet Watts on the map. My black ass is in Folsom this morning, but my black heart is in Watts. Tears of joy were rolling from his eyes. It was a cleansing, revolutionary laugh we all shared, something we have not often had occasion for. Watts was a place of shame. We used to use Watts as an epithet in much the same way as city boys used country as a term of derision, to deride one as a lame who did not know what was happening, a rustic bumpkin. The in crowd of the time from L.A. would bring a cat down by saying that he had just left Watts, that he ought to go back to Watts until he had learned what was happening, or that he had just stolen enough money to move out of Watts and was already trying to play a cool part. But now blacks are seen in Folsom saying, "I'm from Watts, baby." Whether true or no, but I think that meaning is clear. Confession. I too have participated in this game saying, "I'm from Watts." In fact, I did live there for a time, and I'm proud of it. The tired lamentations of Whitney Young, Roy Wilkins, and the preacher notwithstanding. Eyes. Folsom Prison, October 28th, 1965. Once I was walking down Main Street in L.A. around noon on a Saturday, and it was a beautiful sunny day. I was just a young stud, about 16, I guess, and I had one of those "I think I'm cute" type walks, prancing and rolling on my toes. Before me and adjacent to the sidewalk was a shoe shine stand facing in my direction. A jukebox was blaring a tune of the times, and I got caught up in the music as I walked along. I was kind of walking in time to the music. Sitting up on the customer seat was a big fine sister who was propping her fingers and wiggling to the music and smiling at me because our eyes had met. There was no one else in the shine stand, and just as I came up, even with the stand, the record ended, and I stopped in my tracks, staring at the girl in a fascinated stupor. Then, without warning, she sang, "Beautiful, beautiful brown eyes." Wow, that did me in, cleaned me out, and I realized that I was standing there gaping at her like a country fool. I was really confused and embarrassed, and I cut out, completely blowing my cool. And as I split, I saw her cracking up with kicks. It really made me feel good though, and I've always treasured that memory because the incident was so penetrating. I had quite a different experience during a factional power struggle among the Muslims in San Quentin. A right-wing brother tried to undercut me with a smear tactic. "Brothers," he said to all of us one day, "Brother Eldridge should not be allowed to hold any position until he's been a Muslim for 7 years. He's got the mark of the beast on him. Look at his eyes. He's got the devil's eyes." That startled me and touched a sore spot. A lot of other brothers were also confused, but one of my friends saved the day by pointing out that many so-called Negroes have funny beast eyes. The devils have mixed us all up. Even the Honorable Elijah Muhammad has light-colored eyes. Brother Malcolm has light-colored eyes. So don't be going around here talking like that, because you're only spreading disunity. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches unity. If you call yourself a Muslim, brother, you're going to have to start thinking positive and put down all that negative. The cat had to beat a hasty retreat, but I was bleeding inside. Soul Food. Folsom Prison, November 3rd, 1965. You hear a lot of jazz about soul food. Take chitlins. The ghetto blacks eat them from necessity, while the black bourgeoisie has turned it into a mocking slogan. Eating chitlins is like going slumming to them. Now that they have the price of a steak, here they come prating about soul food. The people in the ghetto want steaks, beef steaks. I wish I had the power to see to it that the bourgeoisie really did have to make it on soul food. The emphasis on soul food is counter-revolutionary black bourgeois ideology. The main reason Elijah Muhammad outlawed pork for Negroes had nothing to do with dietary laws. The point is that when you get all those blacks cooped up in the ghetto with beef steaks on their minds, with the weight of religious fervor behind the desire to chuck, then something's got to give. The system has made allowances for the ghettoites to obtain a little pig. But there are no provisions for the elite to give up any beef. The walls come tumbling down. A religious conversion, more or less. Folsom Prison, September 10th, 1965. Once I was a Catholic. I was baptized, made my first communion, my confirmation, and I wore a cross with Jesus on it around my neck. I prayed at night, said my rosary, went to confession, and said all the Hail Marys and Our Fathers to which I was sentenced by the priest. Hopelessly enamored of sin myself, yet appalled by the sins of others, I longed for Judgment Day and the trial before a jury of my peers. This was my only chance to escape the flames which I could feel already licking at my feet. I was in a California Youth Authority institution at the time, having transgressed the laws of man. God did not indict me that time. If he did, it was a secret indictment, for I was never informed of any charges brought against me. The reason I became a Catholic was that the rule of the institution held that every Sunday each inmate had to attend the church of his choice. I chose the Catholic Church because all the Negroes and Mexicans went there. The whites went to the Protestant chapel. Had I been a fool enough to go to the Protestant chapel, one black face in a sea of white, and with guerrilla warfare going on between us, I might have ended up a Christian martyr. St. Eldridge, the stoop. It all ended one day at a catechism class. The priest asked if anyone present understood the mystery of the Holy Trinity. I had been studying my lessons diligently and knew by heart what I'd been taught. Up shot my hand, my heart throbbing with piety, pride, for this chance to demonstrate my knowledge of the Word. To my great shock and embarrassment, the father announced, and it sounded like a thunderclap, that I was lying, that no one, not even the Pope, understood the Godhead. And why else did I think they called it the mystery of the Holy Trinity? I saw in a flash, stung to the quick by the jeers of my fellow catechumens, that I had been used, that the Father had been lying in wait for the chance to drop that thunderbolt in order to drive home the point that the Holy Trinity was not to be taken lightly. I had intended to explain the Trinity with an analogy to 3-in-1 oil, so it was probably just as well. The Christ and His Teachings. Folsom Prison, September 10th, 1965. My first awareness of Thomas Merton came in San Quentin, back in, I believe, 1959-1960. During that time, a saint walked the earth in the person of one Chris Lovejoy. He was a teacher at San Quentin and guru to all who came to him. What did he teach? Everything. It is easier just to say he taught Lovejoy and let it go at that. He himself claimed to be sort of a disciple of Alan W. Watts, whom he used to bring over to Kew to lecture us now and then on Hinduism, Zen Buddhism, and on the ways the peoples of Asia view the universe. I never understood how, quote, the Christ, as I used to call Lovejoy to his sorrow and pain, could sit at Watts' feet, because he always seemed to me more warm, more human, and possessed of greater wisdom than Watts displayed either in his lectures or his books. It may be that I received this impression from having been exposed more to Lovejoy than to Watts. Yet there was something about Watts that reminded me of a slick advertisement for a labor-saving device aimed at the American housewife out of the center page of Life magazine, while Lovejoy's central quality seemed to be pain, suffering, and a peculiar strength based on his understanding of his own helplessness, weakness, and need. Under Lovejoy, I studied world history, Oriental philosophy, Occidental philosophy, comparative religion, and economics. I could not tell one class from the other. Neither could the other students, and neither, I believed, could Lovejoy. He was all Lovejoy. The walls of his classrooms were covered with cardboard placards which bore quotations from the world's great thinkers. There were quotes from Japanese, Eskimos, Africans, Hopi Indians, Peruvians, Voltaire, Confucius, Lao Tzu, Jesus Christ, Moses, Muhammad, Buddha, Rabbi Hillel, Plato, Aristotle, Marx, Lenin, Mao Zedong, Zoroaster, and Thomas Merton, among others. Once Lovejoy gave a lecture on Merton, reading from his works and trying to put the man's life and work in context. He seemed desperately to want us to respect Merton's vocation and choice of the contemplative life. It was an uphill battle because a prison is in many ways like a monastery. The convicts in Lovejoy's class hated prison. We were appalled that a free man would voluntarily enter prison or a monastery. Let me say it right out. We thought Merton was some kind of nut. We thought the same thing about Lovejoy. My secret disgust was that in many ways I was nothing but a monk, and how I loathed that view of myself. I was mystified by Merton, and I could not believe in his passionate defense of monkhood. I distrusted Lovejoy on the subject of Thomas Merton. My mind heard a special pleading in his voice. In his ardent defense of Merton, Lovejoy seemed to be defending himself, even trying to convince himself. One day, Lovejoy confided to us that he had tried to be a monk but couldn't make it. He made it all right without even realizing it. San Quentin was his monastery. He busied himself about the prison as though he had a special calling to minister to the prisoners. He was there day and night and on Saturdays without fail. The officials would sometimes have to send a guard to his class to make him stop teaching, so the inmates could be locked up for the night. He was horror-stricken that they could make such a demand of him. Reluctantly, he sit down heavily in his seat, burdened by defeat, and tell us to go to our cells. Part of the power we gave him was that we would never leave his class unless he himself dismissed us. If a guard came and told us to leave, he got only cold stares. We would not move until Lovejoy gave the word. He got a secret kick out of this little victory over his tormentors. If, as happened once, he was unable to make it to the prison because his car had a blowout, he'd be full of apologies and pain next day. Lovejoy had extracted from me my word that I would someday read Merton for myself. He did not insist upon any particular time, just some day. Easy enough, I gave my promise. In 1963, when I was transferred from San Quentin to Folsom for being an agitator, they put me in solitary confinement. The officials did not deem it wise at that time to allow me to circulate among the general inmate population. I had evolved a crash program which I would immediately activate whenever I was placed in solitary confinement. Stock up on books and read, read, read. Do calisthenics and forget about the rest of the world. I had learned the waste and futility of worry. Years ago, I had stopped being one of those convicts who take a little calendar and mark off each day. When I asked for books to read in this particular hole, a trustee brought me a list from which to make selections. On the list I was delighted to see Merton's The 7-Story Mountain, his autobiography. I thought of Eldridge. Here was a chance to fulfill my promise. I was tortured by that book because Merton's suffering in his quest for God seemed all in vain to me. At the time I was a black Muslim chained in the bottom of a pit by the devil. Did I expect Allah to tear down the walls and set me free? To me, the language and symbols of religion were nothing but weapons of war. I had no other purpose for them. All the gods are dead except the god of war. I wished that Merton had stated in secular terms the reasons he withdrew from the political, economic, military, and social system into which he was born, seeking refuge in a monastery. Despite my rejection of Merton's theistic worldview, I could not keep him out of the room. He shouldered his way through the door. "Welcome, Brother Merton." I gave him a bear hug. Most impressive of all to me was Merton's description of New York's black ghetto, Harlem. I liked it so much I copied out the heart of it in longhand. Later, after getting out of solitary, I used to keep this passage in mind when delivering black Muslim lectures to other prisoners. Here is an excerpt. Here in this huge, dark, steaming slum, hundreds of thousands of Negroes are herded together like cattle, most of them with nothing to eat and nothing to do. All the senses and imagination and sensibilities and emotions and sorrows and desires and hopes and ideas of a race with vivid feelings and deep emotional reactions are forced in upon themselves, bound inward by an iron ring of frustration. The prejudice that hems them in with its 4 insurmountable walls. In this huge cauldron, inestimable natural gifts, wisdom, love, music, science, poetry are stamped down and left to boil with the dregs of an elementally corrupted nature, and thousands upon thousands of souls are destroyed by vice and misery and degradation, obliterated, wiped out, washed from the register of the living, dehumanized. What has not been devoured in your dark furnace, Harlem? By marijuana, by gin, by insanity, hysteria, syphilis. For a while, whenever I felt myself softening, relaxing, I had only to read that passage to become once more a rigid flame of indignation. It had precisely the same effect on me that Elijah Muhammad's writings used to have, or the words of Malcolm X, or the words of any spokesman of the oppressed in any land. I vibrate sympathetically to any protest against tyranny. But I want to tell more about Eldridge, the Christ. Chris Eldridge had a profound mind and an ecumenical education. I got the impression that the carnage of World War II, particularly the scientific, systematic approach to genocide of the Nazi regime, had been a traumatic experience from which it was impossible for him to recover. It was as if he had seen or experienced something which had changed him forever, sickened his soul, overwhelmed him with sympathy and love for all mankind. He hated all restraints upon the human mind, the human spirit. or blind believing, or dogmatic assertion. He questioned everything. I was never sure of just what was driving him. That he was driven there could be no doubt. There was a sense of unreality about him. It seemed that he moved about in a mist. The atmosphere he created was like the mystic spell of Khalil Gibran's poetry. He seemed always to be listening to distant music or silent voices, or to be talking in a whisper to himself. He loved silence, and said that it should only be broken for important communications, and he would expel students from his classes for distracting the others by chatting idly in the back rows. In his classes he was a dictator. He enforced certain rules which brooked no deviation. No smoking in his classroom at any time, before class, during class, at recess, or even when school was out. No talking in Eldridge's class, unless it was pertinent to the subject at hand. No eating or chewing gum in his classroom. No profanity. Simple rules, perhaps, but in San Quentin they were visionary, adventurous, audacious. The Christ enforced them strictly. The other teachers and the guards wondered how he got away with it. We students wondered why we enthusiastically submitted to it. The Christ would look surprised, as if he did not understand, if you asked him about it. If one of the other teachers forgot and came into Eldridge's room smoking, he was sent hopping. The same went for prison guards. I can still see the shocked expression of a substitute teacher who, coming into Eldridge's room during recess smoking a pipe, was told, "Leave this room." When you came to Eldridge's classes, you came to learn. If you betrayed other motives, get out of here this minute, without malice, but without equivocation. He was a magnet, an institution. He worked indefatigably. His day started when the school bell rang at 8 a.m. Often he would forego lunch to interview a few students and help them along with their schoolwork or personal problems. He never ceased complaining because the officials refused to allow him to eat lunch in the mess hall with the prisoners. Had they given him a cell, he would have taken it. After lunch, he'd teach until 3 p.m. When night school convened at 6 p.m., the Christ would be there, beaming, radiating, and he'd teach passionately until 10 p.m. Then, reluctantly, he'd go home to suffer in exile until school opened next day. On Saturdays, he'd be there bright and early to teach. Eldridge. He would have come on Sundays too, only the officials put their foot down and refused to hear it. The Christ settled for a Sunday evening radio program of 2 hours, which he taped for a broadcast to the prisoners. His classes were works of art. He made ancient history contemporary by evoking the total environment, intellectual, social, political, economic, of an era. He breathed life into the shattered ruins of the past. Students sat entranced while the Christ performed, his silver-rimmed glasses reflecting the light in eye-twinkling flashes. He dressed like a college boy, betraying a penchant for simple sweaters and plain slacks of no particular distinction. He burned incense in his classroom when he lectured on religion to evoke a certain mood. He was drawn to those students who seemed most impossible to teach. Old men who have been illiterate all their lives and set in their ways. Eldridge didn't believe that anyone or anything in the universe was set in its ways. Those students who were intelligent and quickest to learn, he seemed reluctant to bother with, almost as if to say, pointing at the illiterates and speaking to the bright ones, "Go away, leave me, you don't need me, these others do." Jesus wept. Eldridge would weep over a tragic event that had taken place 10,000 years ago in some forgotten byway in the Fertile Crescent. Once he was lecturing on the ancient Hebrews. He was angry with them for choosing to settle along the trade routes between Egypt and Mesopotamia. He showed how, over the centuries, time and time again, these people had been invaded, slaughtered, driven out, captured, but always to return. "What is it that keeps pulling them back to this spot?" he exclaimed. He lost his breath, his face crumbled, and he broke down and wept. "Why do they insist on living in the middle of that, for once," I thought meaningly, the Christ couldn't find a word, that freeway. They have to sit down in the center of the freeway. That's all it is. Look." He pointed out the trade routes on the map behind his desk. Then he sat down and cried uncontrollably for several minutes. Another time he brought tape-recorded selections from Thomas Wolfe's "Look Homeward Angel." The Christ wept all through the tape. The Christ could weep over a line of poetry, over a single image in a poem, over the beauty of a poem's music, over the fact that man can talk, read, write, walk, reproduce, die, eat, eliminate, over the fact that a chicken can lay an egg. Once he lectured us all week on love. He quoted what poets had said of love, what novelists had said of love, what playwrights had said of love. He played tapes of Ashley Montagu on love. Over the weekend, each student was to write an essay on his own conception of love, mindful to have been influenced by what he had been listening to all week long. In my essay, I explained that I did not love white people. I quoted Malcolm X. "How can I love the man who raped my mother, killed my father, enslaved my ancestors, dropped atomic bombs on Japan, killed off the Indians, and keeps me cooped up in the slums? I'd rather be tied up in a sack and tossed into the Harlem River first." Lovejeev refused to grade my paper. He returned it to me. I protested that he was being narrow-minded and dogmatic in not understanding why I did not love white people simply because he himself was white. He told me to talk with him after class. "How can you do this to me?" he asked. "I've only written the way I feel," I said. Instead of answering, he cried. "Jesus wept," I told him, and walked out. 2 days later, he returned my essay ungraded. There were instead spots on it which I realized to be his tears. Although Lovejeev's popularity among the prisoners continued to soar, and the waiting list for his classes grew longer and longer, prison authorities banned his radio program. Then they stopped him from coming in on Saturdays. Then they stopped him from teaching night school. Then they took away his pass and barred him from San Quentin. I must say that this man has not been adequately described. Certain things I hold back on purpose, others I don't know how to say. Until I began writing this, I did not know that I had a vivid memory of him. But now I can close my eyes and relive many scenes in which he goes into his act. A day in Folsom Prison. Folsom Prison, September 19th, 1965. My day begins officially at 7 o'clock, when all inmates are required to get out of bed and stand before their cell doors to be counted by guards who walk along the tiers saying 1, 2, 3. However, I never remain in bed until 7. I'm usually up by 5:30. The first thing I do is make up my bed. Then I pick up all my books, newspapers, etc. off the floor of my cell and spread them over my bed to clear the floor for calisthenics. In my cell, I have a little stool on which I lay a large plywood board, about 2.5 by 3 feet, which I use as a typing and writing table. At night, I load this makeshift table down with books and papers, and when I read at night, I spill things all over the floor. When I leave my cell, I set this board loaded down on my bed, so that if a guard comes into my cell to search it, he will not knock the board off the stool, as has happened before. Still in the nude, the way I sleep, I go through my routine. Knee bends, butterflies, touching my toes, squats, windmills. I continue for about a half an hour. Sometimes, if I have something I want to write or type, so that I can mail it that morning, I forgo my calisthenics. But this is unusual. We are required, if we want our mail to go out on a certain day, to have it in the mailbox by about 8 o'clock. When we leave our cells at 7:30 to go to breakfast, we pass right by the mailbox and drop in our mail on the way to the mess hall. Usually, by the time I finish my calisthenics, the trustee, we call him tier tender or key man, comes by and fills my little bucket with hot water. We don't have hot running water ourselves. Each cell has a small sink with a cold water tap, a bed, a locker, a shelf or two along the wall, and a commode. The trustee has a big bucket with a long spout, like the ones people use to water their flowers, only without the sprinkler. He pokes the spout through the bars and pours you about a gallon of hot water. My cell door doesn't have bars on it. It is a solid slab of steel with 58 holes in it, about the size of a $50, and a slot in the center at eye level, about 1 inch wide and 5 inches long. The trustee sticks the spout through one of the little holes and pours my hot water. And in the evening, the guard slides my mail into me through the slot. Through the same slot, the convicts pass newspapers, books, candy, and cigarettes to one another. When the guard has mail for me, he stops at the cell door and calls my name, and I recite my number, A29498, to verify that I am the right Cleaver. When I get mail, I avert my eyes so I can't see who it's from. Then I sit down on my bed and peep at it real slowly, like a poker player peeping at his cards. I can feel when I've got a letter from you, and when I peep up on your name on the envelope, I let out a big yell. It's like having 4 aces. But if the letter is not from you, it's like having 2 deuces, a 3, a 4, and a 5, all in scrambled suits. A bum kick. Nothing. What is worse is when the guard passes my door without pausing. I can hear his keys jingling. If he stops at my door, the keys sound like Christmas bells ringing. But if he keeps going, they just sound like keys. I live in the honor block. In the other blocks, the fronts of the cells consist of nothing but bars. When I first moved into the honor block, I didn't like it at all. The cells seemed made for a dungeon. The heavy steel doors slammed shut with a clang of finality that chilled my soul. The first time that door closed on me, I had the same wild, hysterical sensation I felt years ago at San Quentin when they first locked me in solitary. For the briefest moment, I felt like yelling out for help, and it seemed that in no circumstances would I be able to endure that cell. All in that split second, I felt like calling out to the guards, pleading with them to let me out of the cell, begging them to let me go. promising them that I would be a good boy in the future. But just as quickly as the feeling came, it went, dissolved, and I felt at peace with myself. I felt that I could endure anything, everything, even the test of being broken on a rack. I've been in every type of cell they have in the prisons of California, and the door to my present cell seems the most cruel and ugly of all. However, I have grown to like this door. When I go out of my cell, I can hardly wait to get back in, to slam that cumbersome door, and hear the sharp click as the trustee snaps the lock behind me. The trustees keep the keys to the cells of the honor block all day, relinquishing them at night. And to get into your cell, all you have to do is round up the trustee in charge of your tier. Once inside my cell, I feel safe. I don't have to watch the other convicts anymore, or the guards in the gun towers. If you live in a cell with nothing but bars on the front, you cannot afford to relax. Someone can walk along the tier and throw a Molotov cocktail in on you before you know it. Something I've seen happen in San Quentin. Whenever I live in one of those barred cells, I keep a blanket within easy reach in case of emergency, to smother a fire if need be. Paranoia? Yes. But it's the least one can do for oneself. In my present cell, with its impregnable door, I don't worry about sabotage. Although if someone wanted to badly enough, they could figure something out. Well, after I finish my calisthenics and the hot water has arrived, I take me a jailbird bath in the little sink. It's usually about 6 a.m. by then. From then until 7:30, when we are let out for breakfast, I clean up my cell and try to catch a little news over the radio. Radio? Each cell has a pair of earphones with only 2 channels on it. The programs are monitored from the radio room. The radio schedule is made up by the radio committee, of which I am a member. At 7:30, breakfast from the mess hall every day except Saturday, my day off. I go straight to the bakery, change into my white working clothes, and that's me until about noon. From noon, I am free until 3:20, the evening mandatory lockup, when we are required again to stand before our cell doors and be counted. There is another count at 6:30 p.m., 3 times every day without fail. When I'm through working in the bakery, I have the choice of 1. Going to my cell, 2. Staying in the dining room to watch TV, 3. Going down to the library, or 4. Going out to the yard to walk around, sit in the sun, lift weights, play some funny game like checkers, chess, marbles, horseshoes, handball, baseball, shuffleboard, beating on the punching bag, basketball, talk, TV, paddle tennis, watching the other convicts who are watching other convicts. When I first came to Folsom, I was astonished to see the old grizzled cons playing marbles. The marble players of Folsom are legendary throughout the prison system. I first heard about them years ago. There is a sense of ultimate defeat about them. Some guy might boast about how he is going to get out next time and stay out, and someone will put him down by saying he'll soon be back, playing marbles like a has-been, a never was, blasted back into childhood by crushing defeat to his final dream. The marble players have the game down to an art, and they play all day long, fanatically absorbed in what they are doing. If I have a cell partner who knows the game, I play him chess now and then, maybe a game each night. I have a chess set of my own, and sometimes, when I feel like doing nothing else, I take out a little envelope in which I keep a collection of chess problems clipped from newspapers and run off one or two. But I have never been able to give all my time to one of these games. I am seldom able to play a game of chess out on the yard. Whenever I go out on the yard these days, I'm usually on my way to the library. On the yard there is a little shack off to one corner, which is the office of the Inmates Advisory Council, IAC. Sometimes I visit the shack to shoot the bull and get the latest drawings, news, and sometimes I go out to the weightlifting area, strip down to a pair of trunks, and push a little iron for a while and soak up the sun. At 3:25 lockup, stand for count. After count, off to the evening meal. Back to the cell. Stand for count at 6:30. After the 6:30 count, we are all let out of our cells, one tier at a time, for showers, to exchange dirty socks and towels for clean ones, a haircut, then back to the cell. I duck this crush by taking my showers in the bakery. At night, I only go to exchange my linen. In the honor block, we are allowed to come out after the 6:30 count every Saturday, Sunday, and Wednesday night to watch TV until 10 o'clock before we are locked up for the night. The only time I went out for TV was to dig the broads on Shindig and Hollywood A Go-Go. But those programs don't come on anymore. We recently got the rule changed so that on TV nights, those in the honor block can type until 10. It used to be that no typing was allowed after 8. I am very pleased to be able to get in that extra typing time. I can write you more letters. On Thursday, I go out of my cell after the 6:30 count to attend the weekly IAC meetings. These meetings adjourn promptly at 9 o'clock. On Saturday mornings, my off day, I usually attend the meetings of the Gavel Club. But this past Saturday, I was in the middle of my last letter to you, and I stole away to my cell. I enjoyed it so much that I am tempted to put the Gavel Club down, but I hope that I don't, because that's where I am gaining some valuable experience and technique in public speaking. On the average, I spend approximately 17 hours a day in my cell. I enjoy the solitude. The only drawback is that I am unable to get the type of reading material I want, and there is hardly anyone with a level head to talk to. There are quite a few guys here who write. It seems that every convict wants to. Some of them have managed to sell a piece here and there. They have a writer's workshop which meets in the library under the wing of our librarian. I've never had a desire to belong to this workshop, partly because of my dislike for the attitude of the librarian, and partly because of the phony, funny-style convicts. Mostly, I suppose, it's because the members of the workshop are all white and all sick when it comes to color. They're not all sick, but they're not for real. They're fair weather types, not even as lukewarm as good white liberals, and they conform to the Mississippi atmosphere prevalent here in Folsom. Blacks and whites do not fraternize together in comfort here. Harry Golden's concept of vertical integration and horizontal segregation about covers it. The whites want to talk with you out on the yard or at work, standing up, but they shun you when it comes to sitting down. For instance, when we line up for chow, the lines leading into the mess halls are integrated. But once inside the mess hall, blacks sit at the tables by themselves, and whites sit with themselves or the Mexicans. There's this one Jewish stud out of New York who fell out of Frisco. He thinks he is another Lenny Bruce. In point of fact, he is funny and very glib, and I dig talking with him. He's a hype, but he is very down with the current scene. Says that he lived in North Beach and all that, and that he has this chick who writes him who is a member of the Dubois Club in Frisco. Well, this cat is well read, and we exchange reading material. He says that at home he has every copy of the Realists published up to the time of his fall. The Evergreen Review kills him. We communicate pretty well, and I know that stud is not a racist, but he is a conformist, which in my book is worse, more dangerous than an out-and-out foe. The other day, we were talking about the free speech movement. He was reading a book by Paul Goodman, Growing Up Absurd, which he had with him. We were very hung up talking, and then it was time for lunch. We got in line and continued our conversation. He was trying to convince me that the whole FSM was predicated on the writings of Paul Goodman, and that he had heard with his own ears Mario Savio say as much. Then all of a sudden, I noticed this cat grow leery and start looking all around. He made me nervous. I thought maybe someone was trying to sneak up on us with a knife or something. When he kept doing this, I asked him what the fuck was the matter with him. He turned real red and said that he just remembered that he had to talk to another fellow. I dug right away what the kick was, so I said later, and he split. I'm used to such scenes, having a 400-year heritage of learning to roll with that type of punch. I saw him in the mess hall looking very pushed out of shape. I had to laugh at him. I felt that he was probably thinking that if the whites put the blacks in the gas chambers, they might grab him too if he was with me. That thought tickled me a little as I watched him peeping around like a ferret. One of his points of indignation is that he says he will never forgive Israel for kidnapping and killing Eichmann. And he gets mad at me because I take Israel's side just to keep the conversation alive. Too much agreement kills a chat. What really bugs him is when I say that there are many blacks who, if they were in the position, would do a little rounding up of the Eichmann types in America. A few days later he told me, "You saw through me the other day, didn't you?" "I see through you every day," I told him. He looked as if he expected or wanted me to hit him or something. I told him that he was good for nothing but to be somebody's jailhouse wife, and he laughed, then launched into a Lenny Bruce type monologue. My own reaction is to have as little as possible to do with the whites. I have no respect for a duck who runs up to me on the yard all buddy-buddy and then feels obliged not to sit down with me. It's not that I'm dying to sit with him either, but there's a principle involved which cuts me deeply. Talk about hypocrisy, you should see the library. We are allowed to order from the state library only non-fiction and law books. Of the law books, we can only order books containing court opinion. We can get any decision of the California District Court of Appeals, the California Supreme Court, the U.S. District Courts, the Circuit Courts, and the U.S. Supreme Court. But books of an explanatory nature are prohibited. Many convicts who do not have lawyers are forced to act in propria persona. They do all right, but it would be much easier if they could get books that showed them how properly to plead their case, how to prepare their petitions and briefs. This is a perpetual sore point with the Folsom Prison Bar Association, as we call ourselves. All of the novels one needs to read are unavailable, and the librarian won't let you send for them. I asked him once if he had read a certain book. "Oh, yes," he exclaimed. "What did you think of it?" I asked. "Absolutely marvelous," he said. "How about letting me send to the state library for it?" I asked. "No." Books that one wants to read so bad that it is a taste in the mouth, like Calvin C. Hurnton's Sex and Racism in America, he won't let you have. The warden says no sex is his perpetual squelch. There is a book written by a New York judge which gives case histories of prostitutes. The authors explore why white prostitutes, some of them from the deepest South, had Negroes for pimps, and I wanted to reread it. "No sex," said the librarian. He is indifferent to the fact that it is a matter of life and death to me. I don't know how he justifies this, because you can go over to the inmate canteen and buy all the prurient, pot-boiling, anti-literature that has ever been written. But everything that is happening today is verboten. I've been dying to read Norman Mailer's An American Dream, but that too is prohibited. You can have Reader's Digest, but Playboy? Not a chance. I have long waited to file suit in federal court for the right to receive Playboy magazine. Do you think Hugh Hefner would finance such an action? I think some very nice ideas would be liberated. The library does have a selection of very solid material, things done from 10 years ago all the way back to the Bible. But it is unsatisfactory to a stud who is trying to function in the last half of the 20th century. Go down there and try to find Hemingway, Mailer, Camus, Sartre, Baldwin, Henry Miller, Terry Southern, Julian Mayfield, Bellow, William Burroughs, Allen Ginsberg, Herbert Gold, Robert Gover, J.O. Killens, etc. No action. They also have this sick thing going on when it comes to books by and about Negroes. Robert F. Williams' book, Negroes with Guns, is not allowed anymore. I ordered it from the state library before it was too popular around here. I devoured it and let a few friends read it before the librarian dug it and put it on the blacklist. Once I ordered 2 books from the inmate canteen with my own money. When they arrived here from the company, the librarian impounded them, placing them on my property, the same as they did my notebooks. I want to devote my time to reading and writing, with everything else secondary, but I can't do that in prison. I have to keep my eyes open at all times, or I won't make it. There is always some madness going on, and whether you like it or not, you're involved. There is no choice in the matter. You cannot sit and wait for things to come to you. So I engage in all kinds of petty intrigue, which I found necessary to survival. It consumes a lot of time and energy, but it is necessary. Initial reactions on the assassination of Malcolm X. Folsom Prison, June 19th, 1965. Sunday is movie day at Folsom Prison, and I was sitting in the darkened hulk of Mess Hall Number 1, which convicts call the Folsom Theater, watching Victor Buono in a movie called The Strangler. when a convict known as Silly Willie came over to where I was sitting and whispered into my ear, "Brother Jay sent me in to tell you it just came over the TV that Malcolm X was shot as he addressed a rally in New York." For a moment, the earth seemed to reel in orbit. The skin all over my body tightened up. "How bad?" I asked. "The TV didn't say," answered Silly Willie. The distress was obviously in his voice. "We was around back in Pipe Alley checking TV when a special bulletin came on. All they said was Malcolm X was shot and they were rushing him to the hospital." "Thanks," I said to Silly Willie. I felt his reassuring hand on my shoulder as he faded away in the darkness. For a moment, I pondered whether to go outside and get more information, but something made me hang back. I remember distinctly thinking that I would know soon enough. On the screen before me, Victor Buono had a woman by the throat and was frantically choking the last gasping twitches of life out of her slumping body. I was thinking that if Malcolm's wounds were not too serious, that if he recovered, the shooting might prove to be a blessing in disguise. It would focus more intensified attention on him and create a windfall of sympathy and support for him throughout America's black ghettos, and so put more power into his hands. The possibility that the wounds may have been fatal, that as I sat there Malcolm was lying already dead, was excluded from my mind. After the movie ended, as I filed outside in the long line of convicts and saw the shocked, wild expression on Brother Jay's face, I still could not believe that Malcolm X was dead. We mingled in the crowd of convicts milling around in the yard and were immediately surrounded by a group of Muslims, all of whom, like myself, were firm supporters of Malcolm X. "He's dead," their faces said, although not one of them spoke a word. As we stood there in silence, two Negro inmates walked by and one of them said to us, "That's a goddamn shame how they killed that man. Of all people, why they killed Malcolm? Why didn't they kill some of them Uncle Tom and motherfuckers?" I wish I could get my hands on whoever did it. And he walked away, talking and cursing to his buddy. What does one say to his comrades at the moment when the leader falls? All comment seems irrelevant. If the source of death is so-called natural causes or an accident, the reaction is predictable, a feeling of impotence, humbleness, helplessness before the forces of the universe. But when the cause of death is an assassin's bullet, the overpowering desire is for vengeance. One wants to strike out, to kill, crush, destroy, to deliver a telling counterblow, to inflict upon the enemy a reciprocal, equivalent loss. But whom does one strike down at such a time if one happens to be in an anonymous, amorphous crowd of convicts in Folsom Prison, and the leader lies dead thousands of miles away across the continent? "I'm going to my cell," I told the tight little knot of Muslims. "Allah is the best knower. Everything will be made manifest in time. Give it a little time. Assalamu alaikum." "Wa alaikum salam." The brothers returned the salutation, and we shook hands all around, the double handshake which is very popular among Muslims in California prisons. It is so popular that one sometimes grows weary of shaking hands. If a Muslim leaves a group for a minute to go get a drink of water, He is not unlikely to shake hands all around before he leaves and again when he returns. But no one complains, and the convention is respected as a gesture of unity, brotherly love, and solidarity, so meaningful in a situation where Muslims are persecuted and denied recognition and the right to function as a legitimate religion. I headed for my cell. I lived in number 5 building, which is Folsom's honor unit, reserved for those who have maintained a clean record for at least 6 months. Advantages: a larger cell, TV every Wednesday, Saturday, and Sunday night, less custodial supervision, easier ingress and egress. If while living in the honor unit you get into a, quote, beef, which results in action against you by disciplinary committee, one of the certain penalties is that you are immediately kicked out of the number 5 building. As I walked along the first tier toward my cell, I ran into Red, who lived near me on the tier. "I guess you heard about Malcolm." "Yeah," I said. "They say he got wasted." Red, who was white, knew from our many discussions that I was extremely partial to Malcolm, and he said himself, being thoroughly alienated from the status quo, recognized the assassination for what it was: a negative blow against a positive force. Red's questions were the obvious ones: who, why. The questions were advanced tentatively, cautiously, because of the treacherous ground he was on. A red-headed, blue-eyed white man concerned by an event which so many others greeted with smiles and sighs. I went into my cell. Although I heard it blared over the radio constantly and read about it in all the newspapers, days passed during which my mind continued to reject the fact of Malcolm's death. I existed in a dazed state, wandering in a trance around Folsom, drifting through the working hours in the prison bakery, and yet I was keen to observe the effect of the assassination on my fellow inmates. From most of the whites there was a leer and a hint of a smile in the eyes. They seemed anxious to see a war break out between the followers of Elijah and the followers of Malcolm. There are only a few whites in Folsom with whom I would ever discuss the death of Malcolm or anything else besides baseball or the weather. Many of the Mexican Americans were sympathetic, although some of them made a point, when being observed by whites, of letting drop sly remarks indicating they were glad Malcolm was gone. Among the Negroes there was mass mourning for Malcolm X. Nobody talked much for a few days. The only Negroes who were not indignant were a few of the Muslims who remained loyal to Elijah Muhammad. They interpreted Malcolm's assassination as the will of Allah descending upon his head for having gone astray. To them, it was divine chastisement and a warning to those whom Malcolm had tempted. It was not so much Malcolm's death that made them glad, but in their eyes it now seemed possible to heal the schism in the movement and restore the monolithic unity of the Nation of Islam, a unity they looked back on with some nostalgia. Many Negro convicts saw Malcolm's assassination as a historic turning point in black America. Whereas Negroes often talk heatedly about wiping out all the so-called Negro leaders whom they do not happen to like or agree with, this was the first significant case of Negro leader killing that anyone could remember. What struck me is that the Negro convicts welcomed the new era. If a man as valuable to us as Malcolm could go down, then as far as I was concerned, so could any other man, myself included. Coming a week after the alleged expose of the alleged plot to dynamite the Statue of Liberty, Washington Monument, and the Liberty Bell, a plot supposedly hatched by discontented blacks, the assassination of Malcolm X had put new ideas in the wind with implications for the future of black struggle in America. I suppose that like many of the brothers and sisters in the Nation of Islam movement, I also had clung to the hope that somehow the rift between Malcolm X and Elijah Muhammad would be mended. As long as Brother Malcolm was alive, many Muslims could maintain this hope, neatly overlooking the increasing bitterness of their rivalry. But death made the split final and sealed it for history. These events caused a profound personal crisis in my life and beliefs, as it did for other Muslims. During the bitter time of his suspension and prior to his break with Elijah Muhammad, we had watched Malcolm X as he sought frantically to reorient himself and establish a new platform. It was like watching a master do a dance with death on a high-strung tightrope. He pirouetted, twirled, turned somersaults in the air, but he landed firmly on his feet and was off and running. We watched it all, seeking a cause to condemn Malcolm X and cast him out of our hearts. We read all the charges and countercharges. I found Malcolm X blameless. It had been my experience that the quickest way to become hated by the Muslims was to criticize Elijah Muhammad or disagree with something he wrote or said. If Elijah wrote, as he has done, that the swine is a poison creature composed of 1/3 rat, 1/3 cat, and 1/3 dog, and you attempted to cite scientific facts to challenge this, you had sinned against the light. That was all there was to it. How much more unlikely was it, therefore, that Muslims would stand up and denounce Elijah himself, repudiate his authority and his theology, deny his revelation, and take sides against him, the messenger of Almighty God Allah. I never dreamed that someday I would be cast in that hapless role. After Malcolm made his pilgrimage to Mecca, completing a triumphal tour of Africa and the Near East, during which he received the high honors of a visiting dignitary, he returned to the USA and set about building his newly founded organization of Afro-American Unity. He also established the Muslim Mosque Incorporated to receive the Muslims he thought would pull away from Elijah. The Muslim Mosque would teach Orthodox Islam under the direction of Sheikh Ahmed Hassoun from the holy city of Mecca. Grand Sheikh Mohammed Saroor al-Saban, Secretary General of the Muslim World League, had offered the services of Sheikh Ahmed, according to the Los Angeles Herald-Dispatch, to, quote, help Malcolm X in his efforts to correct the distorted image that the religion of Islam has been given by hate groups in this country. I began defending Malcolm X. At a secret meeting of the Muslims in Folsom, I announced that I was no longer a follower of Elijah Muhammad, that I was throwing my support behind Brother Malcolm. I urged everyone there to think the matter over and make a choice, because it was no longer possible to ride two horses at the same time. On the wall of my cell, I had a large framed picture of Elijah Muhammad, which I had had for years. I took it down, destroyed it, and in its place put up, in the same frame, a beautiful picture of Malcolm X, kneeling down in the Muhammad Ali Mosque in Cairo, which I clipped from the Saturday Evening Post. At first, the other Muslims in Folsom denounced me. Some I'd known intimately for years stopped speaking to me or even looking at me. When we met, they averted their eyes. To them the choice was simple. Elijah Muhammad is the hand-picked messenger of Allah, the instrument of Allah's will. All who oppose him are aiding Allah's enemy, the white devils. Whom do you choose, God or the devil? Malcolm X, in the eyes of Elijah's followers, had committed the unforgivable heresy when, changing his views and abandoning the racist position, he admitted the possibility of brotherhood between blacks and whites. In a letter sent back to the U.S. from the Holy Land, Malcolm X had stated, "You may be shocked by these words coming from me, but I have always been a man who tries to face facts and to accept the reality of life as new experience and knowledge unfolded. The experiences of this pilgrimage have taught me much, and each hour in the Holy Land opens my eyes even more. I've eaten from the same plate with people whose eyes were the bluest of blue, whose hair was the blondest of blonde, and whose skin was the whitest of white. And I felt the sincerity in the words and deeds of these white Muslims that I felt among the African Muslims of Nigeria, Sudan, and Ghana." Many of us were shocked and outraged by these words from Malcolm X, who had been a major influence upon us all, and the main factor in many of our conversions to the black Muslims. But there were those of us who were glad to be liberated from a doctrine of hate and racial supremacy. The onus of teaching racial supremacy and hate, which is the white man's burden, is pretty hard to bear. Asked if he would accept whites as members of his organization of Afro-American Unity, Malcolm said he would accept John Brown if he were around today, which certainly is setting the standard high. At the moment I declared myself for Malcolm X, I had some prestige among the Muslims in the prisons of California because of my active role in proselytizing new converts and campaigning for religious freedom for Muslim convicts. We sent a barrage of letters and petitions to the courts, government officials, even the United Nations. After the death of Brother Booker T. X, who was shot dead by a San Quentin prison guard, and who at the time had been my cell partner and the inmate minister of the Muslims of San Quentin, my leadership of the Muslims of San Quentin had been publicly endorsed by Elijah Muhammad's West Coast representative, Minister John Shabazz of Muhammad's Los Angeles Mosque. This was done because of the explosive conditions in San Quentin at the time. Muslim officials wanted to avert any Muslim-initiated violence, which had become a distinct possibility in the aftermath of Brother Booker's death. I was instructed to impose an iron discipline upon the San Quentin Mosque, which had continued to exist despite the unending efforts of prison authorities to stamp it out. Most of the Muslims who were in prison during these days have since been released. I was one of the few remaining, and I was therefore looked upon by the other Muslims as one who had sacrificed and invested much in the struggle to advance the teachings of Elijah Muhammad. For that reason, my defection to Malcolm X caused a great deal of consternation among the Muslims of Folsom. But slowly, Malcolm was getting his machine together, and it was obvious to me that his influence was growing. Negro inmates who had reservations about Malcolm while he was under Elijah's authority now embraced him, and it was clear that they accepted Malcolm's leadership. Negroes whom we had tried in vain for years to convert to Elijah's fold now lined up with enthusiasm behind Malcolm. I ran a regular public relations campaign for Malcolm in Folsom. I saw to it that copies of his speeches were made and circulated among Negro inmates. I never missed a chance to speak favorably about Malcolm, to quote him, to explain and justify what he was trying to do. Soon I had the ear of the Muslims, and it was not long before Malcolm had other ardent defenders in Folsom. In a very short time, Malcolm became the hero of the vast majority of Negro inmates. Elijah Muhammad was quickly becoming irrelevant, passé. Malcolm X had a special meaning for black convicts. A former prisoner himself, he had risen from the lowest depths to great heights. For this reason, he was a symbol of hope, a model for thousands of black convicts who found themselves trapped in the vicious PPP cycle: prison, parole, prison. One thing that the judges, policemen, and administrators of prison seem never to have understood, and for which they certainly do not make any allowances, is that Negro convicts basically, rather than see themselves as criminals and perpetrators of misdeeds, look upon themselves as prisoners of war, the victims of a vicious dog-eat-dog social system that is so heinous as to cancel out their own malefactions. In the jungle, there is no right or wrong. Rather than owing and paying a debt to society, Negro prisoners feel that they are being abused, that their imprisonment is simply another form of the oppression which they have known all their lives. Negro inmates feel that they are being robbed, that it is society that owes them, that should be paying them a debt. America's penology does not take this into account. Malcolm X did, and black convicts know that the ascension to power of Malcolm X, or a man like him, would eventually have revolutionized penology in America. Malcolm delivered a merciless and damning indictment of prevailing penology. It is only a matter of time until the question of the prisoner's debt to society versus society's debt to the prisoner is injected forcefully into national and state politics, into the civil and human rights struggle, and into the consciousness of the body politic. It is an explosive issue which goes to the very root of America's system of justice, the structure of criminal law, the prevailing beliefs and attitudes toward the convicted felon. While it is easier to make out a case for black convicts, the same principles apply to white and Mexican American convicts as well. They too are victimized, albeit a little more subtly, by, quote, society. When black convicts start demanding a new dispensation and definition of justice, naturally the white and Mexican American convicts will demand equality of treatment. Malcolm X was a focus for these aspirations. The black Muslim movement was destroyed the moment Elijah cracked the whip over Malcolm's head, because it was not the black Muslim movement itself that was so irresistibly appealing to the true believers. It was the awakening into self-consciousness of 20 million Negroes which was so compelling. Malcolm X articulated their aspirations better than any other man of our time. When he spoke under the banner of Elijah Muhammad, he was irresistible. When he spoke under his own banner, he was still irresistible. If he had become a Quaker, a Catholic, or Seventh-day Adventist, or a Sammy Davis-style Jew, and if he had continued to give voice to the mute ambitions in the black man's soul, his message would still have been triumphant, because what was great was not Malcolm X, but the truth he uttered. The truth which Malcolm uttered had vanquished the whole passel of so-called Negro leaders and spokesmen who trifle and compromise with the truth in order to curry favor with the white power structure. He was stopped in the only way such a man can be stopped, in the same way that the enemies of the Congolese people had to stop Lumumba, by the same method that exploiters, tyrants, and parasitical oppressors have always crushed the legitimate strivings of people for freedom, justice, and equality, by murder, assassination, and mad dog butchery. What provoked the assassins to murder? Did it bother them that Malcolm was elevating our struggle into the international arena through his campaign to carry it before the United Nations? Well, by murdering him, they only hastened the process, because we certainly are going to take our cause before a sympathetic world. Did it bother the assassins that Malcolm denounced the racist straitjacket demonology of Elijah Muhammad? Well, we certainly do denounce it and will continue to do so. Did it bother the assassins that Malcolm taught us to defend ourselves? We shall not remain a defenseless prey to the murderer, to the sniper, and the bomber. Insofar as Malcolm spoke the truth will triumph and prevail, and his name shall live. And insofar as those who opposed him lied, to that extent will their names become curses, because truth crushed to earth shall rise again. So now Malcolm is no more. The bootlickers, Uncle Toms, lackeys, and stooges of the white power structure have done their best to denigrate Malcolm, to root him out of his people's hearts, to tarnish his memory. But their million-worded lies fall on deaf ears, as Ozzie Davis so eloquently expressed it in his immortal eulogy of Malcolm. If you knew him, you would know why we must honor him. Malcolm was our manhood, our living black manhood. This was his meaning to his people. And in honoring him, we honor the best in ourselves. However much we may have differed with him, or with each other about him, and his value as a man, let his going from us serve only to bring us together now, consigning these mortal remains to earth, the common mother of all, secure in the knowledge that what we place in the ground is no more now a man, but a seed, which, after the winter of our discontent, will come forth again to meet us, and we will know him then for what he was and is, a prince, our own black shining prince, who didn't hesitate to die because he loved us so. We shall have our manhood. We shall have it, or the earth will be leveled